Earthlings, hello. Dr. Corey Wrenn has started a podcast series called Sociology Animals, and just a couple of days ago I did an interview with David Nibert and kind of showcased his work, and so I'd like to support that effort by doing it also. So I'm going to just reproduce the end section of the audio. It's an audio podcast, and so I'll reproduce that just after this little bit from me, and also give you a link to the full interview. It goes through a few of, all of David's books. This one, very important, animal rights, human rights, and this is the Entanglements thesis, very, very important book to read, that one. And then this one, Animal Oppression and Human Violence. This is the Domesecration thesis, very, very important. And then there's 2 volumes of this, which is Animal Oppression and Capitalism. There's 2 volumes of it, and David was kind enough to invite both myself and Corey Wrenn to contribute to this. So if anybody really wants to learn a bit more about why the values of veganism and the values of capitalism, or being a right-wing vegan, doesn't quite work, then these are the books for you. So, on with the audio.
So there's a few more minutes left before the end of the program, and I wanted to use this time to give a little bit more background on David Nibert, who he is and why his work is important. I think he's a bit humble and doesn't really want to say, but in my opinion, David Nibert is really one of the founding figures of vegan sociology, of critical animal sociology. Yes, we've had folks who were writing before him. I really need to look into this, but there's a professor, Clifton Bryant, who is really credited with pushing, I think he did back in the 70s, publish some stuff on why sociology should think about animals. And I'm pretty sure I was in his class. I took his class as a university student at Virginia Tech. It was a class on the sociology of death and dying, which I just took because it sounded interesting. But I think later I come to find out that he also was really one of the pioneers in the sociology of animals in society. But Clifton Bryant was a hunter. Like, he was definitely not pro-animal. I think he was he did safari hunting or something. I don't know. Don't quote me on that. So really, for me, the person who really set the foundation for critical vegan sociology is David Nibert. And when I first read his book, it really transformed my way of thinking about these bigger questions about human relations with other animals. So his first book on this topic that came out in 2002, Human Rights, Animal Rights, basically rewrites history, and it's very ambitious in that way. But see, we were talking about the social construction of reality. Well, one of the ways that reality is constructed, and often in unjust ways, is through the rewriting of history. Max Weber, Karl Marx, all the founding figures in sociology were always very critical of this construction of history. And so this is what David attempts to do in his own work, as he reconstructs history to bring animal voices back in. So there's that book, and there's another book that came out more recently, 2013, which is on the same topic. This book is called Human Violence and Animal Oppression, and basically it takes on this concept of what he calls domesecration. And just a side note, one of the other things that really has influenced me from David Nibert's work is his focus on language and deep and kind of politicizing language, I guess, by denoting its contested nature. He'll change the language. He will put problematic words in quotation marks or italicize them. And so he says it's not, domestication is the more correct way of looking at this, because domestication is a bit of a euphemism. But basically he makes the argument in that book that the advent of domestication really was a turning point in human history, where we doubled down big time on violence against other animals, the control of feminized, animalized bodies, And then you start to see kind of a conflict-based society emerging out of that. And there are ramifications, of course, today. And domestication has only increased and is projected to increase even further. So these books are really, really foundational, and they're asking really big questions, macro questions about human relationships with other animals, and I think really, really good reading. His first book, actually, I use as a textbook when I teach animals in society myself. And I also wanted to highlight that David is kind of interesting because he is certainly an activist scholar. And this is something that I think is worth highlighting, because a lot of folks who come into sociology, the longer you're in it, the more you realize that, you know, there's a lot of careerism. There's a lot of folks who are just really interested in getting their publications out. What school are they getting into? And they don't necessarily remember why we're here in the first place. So I know this section of the ASA is really a space where folks can really embrace that scholar activism. So we talked about this in the last episode with Zoe Sutton. What is this sociology for? Who is it for? And David has been really instrumental in not just talking the talk, but he walks the walk. And so we had a campaign last year, I think it was last year, it was a few months back. There's a college in Ohio that was doing a farm-to-table program and was using 9 lambs in this program. And David really was working really hard to orchestrate, with some other folks as well. There's some other sociologists who were involved in that. And I'm in the UK, so I wasn't able to physically be there, but I did get a website whipped up. But he was out in the trenches. He was out there doing interviews. He was flyering, and he was getting a lot of pushback. And I think that he's a really interesting character for that reason. Not just he wrote these books that really shaped the field, but also, even after all this time, he's actually putting this theory into action. So definitely worth checking out his work. And I'm really, really pleased to have spotlighted him in this series, in this podcast, if anything, for the institutional history. And last point on this, he mentioned after we stopped recording that he had forgotten to mention Jessica Greenbaum, who we interviewed on episode 2, but Jessica has been there from the get-go as well. And like David, they've both been really amazing mentors, are really, really good people. And I'm very pleased to have them on this show and get a little bit of their knowledge, wisdom, and sage advice. So with that, let's let the credits roll.